a formal declaration today. Well, several African countries are holding elections this year, including South Africa, and violent pre- and post-election protests are common. They stem mostly from accusations of vote rigging from opposition parties. Well, now, a new Pan-African study has found that most Africans still want democracy, but there are few who will safeguard its future. The Afrobarometer survey was conducted in 34 countries. To tell us more about their findings, we have Afrobarometer's Sibusiso Nkomo. He's in Cape Town for us this morning. Sibusiso, good morning, and thanks for your time. If you can explain very simply for us just what your main findings were from the study, especially when it comes to how African countries and Africans view democracy.
Good morning, Rebecca. So we conducted the survey from 2016 to 2018. And what we found was that most Africans actually support democracy, but the demand for democracy depends on the country that you're in. So, for example, if you're in Swaziland, you're likely to have less demand for democracy versus Zambia. And one of the main analyses that we found was that 15% of Africans are called dissatisfied Democrats. So when we talk about dissatisfied Democrats, we're actually talking about people who actually demand it. And we see those people as the people who would actually defend democracy if some leader wanted to take over and become a dictator. So that's one of the main findings.
Well, I'm obviously just looking at the numbers that you have here, and it seems not everyone has an opinion about it. Maybe some don't, and others don't particularly prefer democracy. I'd be very interested to know, and it's probably a small number, but why? What are the reasons? Are they just not interested, or do they prefer, other ways of running a country?
Actually, most two-thirds across the board actually don't want one-man rule. They don't want one-party rule. They don't want military rule. So those are high numbers. But in our index, when you combine your support for democracy demand plus rejection of the alternatives, that's where you see how many dissatisfied Democrats there are. So in other words, we know that half of Africans support are definitely in democratic states, and they support it. But actually having to take the next step to go to the street and say, no, I don't want a dictator, that's a different story. So people will be happy to have democracy, but if they don't go out, then they might lose it.
Okay, well, I'm looking at your graph here and looking at the countries, and South Africa featuring very, very low on that. I mean, if I have to count, it's like, what, sixth from the bottom with 54% support for democracy. Is that worrying? Is that surprising?
I think it is worrying because also if you look at election data, for example, compared to other countries internationally, you actually realize that even the amount of people, eligible voters in South Africa are much lower. We're probably closer to the US level. So just over 50% of eligible voters actually go and vote. So, and also I think it's got to do with the issues that we faced over the past few years. So when people are dissatisfied in South Africa, they seem to just sit back and sit down and say, I'm not going to participate. And I think that's what's reflective in the numbers.
Okay, yeah, well, it's actually, we're fifth from the bottom. And then right at the top, for viewers who are wondering, we have Sierra Leone at 84%. Was there anything surprising here for you, Sibusiso, in the countries that, I mean, even Zimbabwe is ahead of us at 75%. So what for you were the surprising factors or findings in this?
I think if you look at countries like South Africa, Lesotho, these are countries that have very specific issues. So in Lesotho, you have an electoral system that has not worked, and it's been changed several times. And you see the numbers dipping. In South Africa, you have the past 9 years that we had. And so I think the actual things that happen in the economy, in the public sphere, really impact how people see democracy, because there's a relationship about it being a material, it'll have a material impact on your life. And that's where the issue lies.
Okay, so I mean, and I know you said just to wrap it up for us, Sibusiso. So I mean, the impact of these attitudes, the impact of these feelings of how South Africans might be feeling, like you say, depends on, you know, whether they'll go out and whether actually ask and scream and shout and protest for what they want. With an election coming up here in South Africa, I mean, what is likely to be the impact of where we are rated on this graph, and just generally speaking to South Africans and those who were surveyed?
I think what you need, from our findings, we see that if you increase the number of dissatisfied Democrats, so the people who demand it and will take action, it's better for democracy. So people need to go out and vote to make their voice known. Whether they vote for the person everybody likes or not, that's not the point. But they actually have to participate, because a system can fall apart if you do nothing and sit back. And just from what we're seeing, it seems that South Africans are happy to sit back and complain if you look at the numbers, but not willing to go out and change things. Thank you very much for that. It does seem like that. Might be an unfair statement, but it does seem. Afrobarometer, Sibusiso Nkomo, he's in Cape Town for us.